Since that day, the house has remained silent. The distance I felt from my parents, the shock of losing my brother, and the vicious cycle of blaming myself led me to shut myself in my room. How long had I been living like that? One day, my mother knocked on my door. She called out to me from outside the door, almost shouting,
"Sarah! Open up! Let's talk properly."
I thought about ignoring her and letting it pass. But if I didn't open the door now, I might never be able to talk properly with my father or mother again, and I might never be able to leave this room. Suddenly scared, I slowly opened the door. My mother, with her kind eyes, looked straight at me. Her determined gaze made me step back. I was scared. It was the first time I felt this way towards my mother. Feeling frightened by my mother slowly approaching, I slipped past her and ran into my brother's room. It was the first time I entered his room since he was gone, and nothing had changed since he was alive. His presence was everywhere.
Sarah.
I always loved hearing my name called gently with a smile. But my brother was no longer there. Realizing this, I collapsed to the floor and cried loudly. My mother watched me from behind. My father and mother sat down, surrounding me, and my father spoke softly.
"I don't know where to start. First, could you read Daniel's diary?"
What my father handed me was my brother's diary. I took the diary with trembling hands and slowly began to read. Both my parents were tearing up, but I was too stunned to react.
"I knew we had to talk about this someday."
My father murmured apologetically.
"Welcome home."
My mother greeted me as I returned home, exhausted from a hard day's work.
"You look tired today as well."
She said this while making my favorite decaffeinated coffee. My father had been awake until a little while ago, but he decided to go to bed early for tomorrow. Well, that makes sense. I looked at the clock and saw it was already past 11 p.m. "Thank you, Mom." Seeing me drink the coffee, my mother also headed to her bedroom. I am Sarah, 39 years old. There is a reason why I am still living with my parents at this age without getting married. I am a surgeon at a general hospital near the station. Sometimes I get called in the middle of the night, and there are times when I can't come home at all. One reason I haven't met a man who can support me through such a demanding job is because of this, but that's not the only reason. When I turned 30, I started to worry about what people would think if I continued living at home, so I considered living alone, but my parents opposed it. You might think they are being overprotective, but that's not the case. I am completely incapable of doing housework. Cleaning, laundry, cooking, I'm bad at all of them. I have the intention to do them, but they just don't go well. Knowing this, my parents probably opposed me living alone because they could foresee the disastrous state my place would become. My mother often jokes,
"I feel like mushrooms might start growing in your room someday."
and I can't argue with her. If I had moved out, I probably wouldn't be able to calmly drink coffee like this and would have collapsed at the cluttered entrance. I am truly grateful. As I passed by my parents' room, I expressed my gratitude in my heart and sank into my fluffy bed. The next morning, I headed to the living room after waking up. I had taken the day off, so I shouldn't receive any calls except for emergencies. Even so, I never let go of my phone because you never know what might happen. My parents were already awake and had finished breakfast early.
Good morning, Sarah. You were late last night. Are you okay?
I could tell he was gently concerned about me. I'm fine. I sat down next to him and glanced at the newspaper. Seeing me, my father murmured.
It's been 23 years since then.
I looked at the date in the newspaper. Exactly 23 years. I nodded with an awkward smile. After finishing breakfast, my parents and I got ready and got into the car. My father was about to drive, but I said, I'll drive. I haven't driven the car recently, so I want to get back into the swing of things. I took the driver's seat. On the way there, the car was unnaturally silent. No one tried to speak. I'm sure both my father and mother had their own thoughts. As I drove, I also remembered many things. We arrived at the cemetery on the small hill and started walking silently. We reached a grave, cleaned it, and prayed together. Finally, my mother spoke.
Daniel, we are doing well.
Hearing her words, my father and I closed our eyes. Each of us spoke to him in our hearts, and eventually, we all looked up. Shall we go now? I called out to my parents, who seemed like they would stand there until sunset if I didn't say something. Watching their backs as they headed to the parking lot, I spoke to the grave. I'll come again, Daniel. And with that, we left the cemetery. We decided to have a meal before heading home and entered a nearby restaurant. As I reached into my bag to take out my phone, something caught my eye. It was something my brother had bought for me when he was still alive, after I had begged him for it. As I held it and reminisced, my father spoke to me with concern. I'm fine. I was just remembering, I said with a smile. My parents are very kind to me. Even though I'm old enough to be called an aunt, they still worry about me. I hardly remember ever being scolded. More than my parents, it was my brother Daniel who showered me with love. When I was little, he always held my hand when we walked, until I was embarrassed and refused. Whenever I went out with friends, he would tell me to be careful of cars and not to follow strangers. I often thought he was worrying too much. But I was happy. I felt loved and cherished. And I loved Daniel just as much. Whenever I heard stories of sibling fights from my friends, I wondered why they fought, because we got along so well. But I also felt a bit strange about it. No matter how selfish I was, my parents and Daniel would always listen with a smile. Why was I so cherished? I would understand that much later. When I entered high school, I had to commute by train instead of walking. Daniel's worry seemed to intensify even more.
Take this.
He handed me a personal alarm so I could call for help if needed, and I couldn't help but laugh. I'm not a kid. Besides, if this goes off on the train, it would be a nuisance. Seeing me laugh, Daniel looked a bit sad. I appreciated his concern, so I said, I'll keep it as a charm because it has your feelings in it. When I put the alarm in my bag, his expression changed to one of relief. He would also ask in detail where I had been and with whom if I came home a little late. I thought about starting a part-time job once I got used to high school life, but I knew he would never allow it. That was something that troubled me. One day, a friend I had become close with in my class asked me if I didn't have a cell phone. Actually, I had been thinking of starting a part-time job to get a cell phone contract, but there was an issue with Daniel. At that time, almost everyone in the class had one, and it was an essential item for communication. How could I get one? While I was thinking about that, Daniel muttered,
It's good that you're making more friends in high school, but it's worrying not knowing where you are or what you're doing.
The moment I heard those words, I had an idea. Then, why don't you buy me a cell phone? I thought it might be too selfish, but it was a gamble. I had never asked Daniel to buy me anything before. I didn't like the idea of taking advantage of his kindness. I was even a little surprised at myself for saying it.
Huh? A cell phone?
He looked puzzled. Maybe because it was unusual for me to ask for something. Had I gone too far with my selfishness? Anxiety crept in. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Just as I thought that.
That's a great idea!
Without paying attention to my stunned expression, Daniel was excitedly talking about when we should go and what kind of phone to get. On the next day off after that conversation, Daniel and I went out to buy a cell phone. I was excited about getting what I wanted and the joy of going out with Daniel after a long time. Maybe I was a bit too giddy, or maybe I felt too safe because Daniel was there, but I think my attention was scattered that day. Normally, I would be careful about my surroundings, but that day my field of vision seemed narrower. Even now, thinking back on it, I know there's nothing I can do about it. On the way back after buying the cell phone, we approached a crosswalk. I was so engrossed in talking with Daniel that I didn't see the signal. Despite the red light, I took a step forward. At that moment,
Watch out!
Daniel shouted and pulled my arm.
You really need to pay attention to the signals.
He was furious. I had never been scolded by Daniel before, and seeing him angry for the first time, I was too shocked to speak. Noticing my open-mouthed, stunned expression, Daniel returned to his usual gentle tone.
Sorry for shouting.
No! I should have watched the signal. Thank you, Daniel. He must have spoken louder than he thought. Daniel looked flustered, but when I turned to face him, he let out a big sigh.
I'm sorry.
Seeing Daniel looking so apologetic with his shoulders hunched, I felt a warm sensation in my chest. My dear brother. I'm not a child anymore. I decided to become a sister who could walk alongside him, not just someone he worried about. While I was thinking that, the signal turned green. Oh, it's green now. Let's go. I started walking. But before I could cross, something pushed me from behind. Ouch! As I fell forward and slowly turned around, I saw Daniel lying on the ground. What happened? People around us were in a commotion. The person in the car that had stopped near Daniel was frozen with a shocked expression. Daniel, lying on the crosswalk, wasn't moving at all. The road quickly became stained with blood, and I was led to a safe place by the people around me. Daniel! I called out to him repeatedly, but it seemed he couldn't hear me. Daniel! I wanted to rush over and check if he was okay, but my legs wouldn't move. Daniel! Someone was patting my back as I cried out. even though my mind was in a panic. For some reason, the voices of others talking stuck in my ears.
He had amazing reflexes.
It's good he saved his sister, but
I didn't want to hear such things. I crouched on the road and cried out as loud as I could. Eventually, an ambulance arrived, and Daniel was taken away. Since I had also gotten injured when I fell, I was taken to the hospital with him. Even in the ambulance, I called out to Daniel. But he still seemed unconscious. Why did this have to happen? He said he would help me set up my cell phone when we got home. I was planning to email him every day so he wouldn't worry. I won't forgive you if you don't wake up. Clenching my fists, I just wished for Daniel's safety with all my heart. My injuries were not serious, and by the time my treatment was finished, my father and mother had arrived at the hospital. But something was off. My mother was crying hysterically, while my father was staring blankly into the distance. Dad! Mom! When they saw me, my mother hugged me while crying, and my father's hand touched both our shoulders. I see. The thought of Daniel being in an accident was too much for my kind parents to bear. But they didn't need to be so down. He would wake up soon. Just as I was about to say that, my father spoke first.
I'm just glad Sarah is safe. Daniel really protected you.
What was he talking about? I couldn't help but laugh. Dad, what are you saying? Just me. Daniel will be fine too. My mother started crying again. I could feel her arms trembling as she held me. Mom, you're crying too much. Daniel will be okay. But neither my father nor my mother responded. How long did we stay there, hugging each other? A woman came over and spoke to us. She led us to where Daniel lay on a bed, looking completely different. Since that day, the house has been eerily quiet, and despite the lights being on, it felt dark. Perhaps out of concern for my depression, my parents didn't talk to me. They seemed distant, almost as if they were afraid of something. I felt a clear distance that hadn't been there when Daniel was alive. Gradually, I began to believe that Daniel's death was my fault, and I was consumed by guilt. Caught in a vicious cycle of feeling distant from my parents, the shock of losing Daniel, and constantly blaming myself, I withdrew into my room and stopped going to school. I spent my days doing nothing but reminiscing about Daniel and crying. On my desk, the shopping bag from the cell phone store we visited that day was left untouched. How long did I spend my days like that? My mother brought meals to my door every day, but I had no appetite and barely touched them. Then one day, as usual, my mother knocked on my door.
Sarah, I'm leaving your meal here.
I didn't respond and listened as her footsteps faded away. Soon, I would hear her going down the stairs. But then, her footsteps stopped and came back towards my room. She stopped in front of the door and spoke.
This can't go on.
It was rare for her to raise her voice like that.
Sarah! Open the door! Let's talk properly.
I thought about ignoring her. But she persistently called out to me and knocked on the door. If I missed this chance, it might really be the end. If I didn't open the door now, I might never be able to talk properly with my parents again, and I might never leave this room. Suddenly scared, I slowly opened the door. Seeing my mother for the first time in a while, she looked pale and haggard. Her gentle eyes stared straight at me. pushed by the determination in her gaze, I took a step back. Scared. It was the first time I felt that way towards my mother. Feeling fear as she slowly approached, I slipped past her and ran out of my room. Instinctively, I ran into Daniel's room. It was the first time I entered his room since he passed away, and nothing had changed since he was alive. The chair he always sat in, the TV connected to the game console, the suit hanging on the wall. On the day we talked about going to buy a cell phone, he was sitting in this chair. We had spent many nights playing games together. Using studying as an excuse, I often came into this room to chat about trivial things. The room still smelled like him, and memories flooded back. His presence was everywhere.
Sarah.
I loved how he always called my name with a gentle smile. But he was no longer there. The moment I realized that, I collapsed to the floor and cried out loud. My mother watched me from behind. By the time I stopped crying, it was already dark outside. My father, who had returned from work, and my mother, who had been watching over me, slowly approached me. Exhausted from crying and drained of all energy, I didn't even have the will to reject them. My parents sat down on either side of me as I sat on the floor, and my father spoke quietly.
Actually, after Daniel passed away, your mother and I came into this room together.
His voice was as gentle as ever, and the awkwardness I had felt earlier was gone.
We found a diary in Daniel's desk. After reading it, we realized we needed to face you properly. Your mother and I talked about it.
A diary. Could it be something Daniel wrote? I had no idea he kept a diary. Holding my hand, my mother began to speak.
Sarah, I'm sorry. I must have seemed so cold. You must have felt anxious and lonely. I'm really sorry.
She apologized over and over, and I didn't know how to respond.
I don't know where to start. First, could you read Daniel's diary?
He handed me the diary Daniel had left behind. I took it hesitantly and began to read slowly. Little did I know, it contained shocking truths. There was once a girl named Leah in this family. The diary began by describing how the four of them lived happily together. Leah and Daniel were very close, and he adored her. One day, Daniel and Leah went to the park together. It was a 3-minute walk from home. The park where Daniel, a grade schooler, always played with his friends. Although my parents were a bit worried, they let them go because it was a familiar park. They told them to be careful and not to come home late. But a few minutes later, Daniel came back alone. He looked pale and couldn't speak properly, so my mother sensed something was wrong and rushed outside. On the way to the park, she saw a car stopped on the road. A man, presumably the driver, was on the phone, looking flustered. When she reached the front of the car, she saw Leah lying there in a terrible state. I instinctively closed the diary. Even though I had cried so much already, tears still streamed down my face. My mother silently patted my back, and once I calmed down a bit, I continued reading. After losing Leah, the atmosphere in the family changed drastically. My parents blamed themselves for letting the children go to the park alone. Daniel felt guilty for being unable to do anything as he watched his sister get hit by a car. His depression was more severe than anyone else's, and he began to refuse to go outside. It became difficult for him to attend school, and my parents, feeling they couldn't go on like this, decided to adopt a child.
Do you think it was a naive idea? but it was the only thing we could do.
I remembered how I once begged my mother for a younger sibling, but she gently refused. I later learned that my mother had had a hysterectomy. Come to think of it, the diary hadn't mentioned me yet. There were no more children that could be born from my mother, so they chose to adopt. With a strangely pounding heart, I continued reading, only to be met with another shock. The child they adopted was a baby girl. Her name was Sarah. What? Me? Both my parents were teary-eyed, but I was too stunned to react. I was adopted.
I knew we had to tell you someday.
He murmured apologetically. In the diary, it was written how Daniel regained his former vitality and how my presence saved him and our parents. The last sentence expressed his determination to continue protecting this beloved family. After reading everything, I took a deep breath. I couldn't believe I was adopted, but more than that, I couldn't bear the fact that my parents had lost both of their biological children in accidents. I began to understand why I had been treated with such exceptional care. After a moment of silence, my father began to speak.
As it was written in the diary, Daniel risked his life to protect you, Sarah.
The small life he couldn't save that day. To never repeat the same mistake, he protected my life with his own. Even though we weren't related by blood. Tears welled up in my eyes again. Even if he did that, my parents are still cold to me. Did my unspoken sobs convey these feelings? This time, my mother spoke to me.
Sarah. It's not that you're father and I don't love you.
My father nodded repeatedly.
We lost 2 children, and we were so scared of losing you too.
I can't understand the feelings of parents who have lost their beloved children. But the deeper the love, the greater the pain must be.
We love you, Sarah, and you are very precious to us. Please understand that.
Listening to them, it seemed that their fear of losing me overshadowed their love, making them unsure of how to interact with me. How could I know that if you didn't tell me? I spoke emotionally. After Daniel was gone, you both seemed so distant. I poured out all the feelings that had been bottled up in my heart. I was lonely. I confessed how I blamed myself for Daniel's death and how their attitude made me feel anxious, lonely, and sad. My mother hugged me. Then my father hugged us both. As we embraced, we cried together. Eventually, we lifted our heads, and my mother spoke.
Sarah, we may be unreliable, but can we start over slowly, as an irreplaceable family?
I squeezed my mother's hand and nodded firmly. Because to me, you both are my real family.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we looked at each other, I suddenly felt embarrassed and made a request to my mother. After crying so much, I'm hungry. Mom, can you cook? I'll help. And so, our family gathered around the dining table for the first time in a long while. The next day, I got ready to go to school. I checked my uniform and hairstyle for any disarray and made sure I hadn't forgotten anything, over and over again. Then, I put the cell phone, which Daniel had bought for me, into my bag. It had a strap attached to it that we had picked out together at a shop on the same day. It sparkled brightly, as if illuminating my future. After having breakfast, I finished getting ready to leave. But suddenly, I was overcome with anxiety and looked at my parents, who were watching over me from behind. It had been 2 months since I stopped going to school. Would I be able to fit in with my class now? Sensing my anxiety, my parents each took one of my hands. It's okay. I have a place to come back to. I have a family waiting for me. With determination, I stepped outside the house.
I never imagined you would become such a fine doctor.
Even though you can't clean or cook at all.
As we ate, the time passed peacefully. I became a doctor because I wanted to save as many victims of accidents like Daniel's as possible. After returning to school, I studied tirelessly, even sacrificing sleep, and eventually decided to go to medical school. Of course, there were many twists and turns along the way. But the presence of Daniel, who continued to live on in our hearts, supported me many times. The next morning, I packed my usual work tools into my bag. When I opened my bag again to check if I had forgotten anything, I saw the strap shining brightly. I had cherished it since that day. It was a treasure I had bought with Daniel. Today, too, it seemed to be pushing me forward. Before leaving the house, I looked back inside. Then, in a loud voice, I said, "I'm off." I felt like I heard Daniel's voice along with my parents' voices.
Take care.
How did you like this story? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.